Good afternoon, dear colleagues. We have some guests and also our students. We are happy to have all of you here with us, and also that you are interested in learning on human resource management, right? And the speaker is today with us is Professor Heiko Schrader, who is Professor of Sociology of Otto von Guericke University, Magdeburg, with whom for the almost last 2 years we have been closely collaborating within Talent Project and the ERASMUS Plus program. So Talent Project is aimed at establishing master program in human resource management in Central Asian countries, and Kyrgyz Economic University is a part of this project. So we are expecting to launch a master program in September 2020. And if you are interested, you can always contact us. We have here contact details, and also visit our social webpage. So the main goal of our session today is providing an interesting overview on the human resource management from economic sociologist perspective. And interestingly, that our speaker, Professor Heiko Schrader, has conducted several field research in Central Asia and in Kyrgyzstan. So I think the peculiarities, right? The region is not novel for him, so it will be interesting for us to learn from him something. So we are happy to have all of you here and for such great opportunity to hold such event with our speaker. And we will start with a presentation from our speakers. Then we will have a short session with for discussion where everybody will be having chance to ask questions. And I would like to ask for those who are here to switch off your videos in order for Zoom running smoothly. We will record it and later on post it on Facebook so you can re-watch again. So without further ado, I'm passing the stage to our speaker, Professor Heiko Schrader. Please.
So thank you very much, Saikal, and all the colleagues from KEU. First of all, I have to correct you. Good morning. So we have morning time, 9 o'clock in the morning, and not afternoon. But I know the time difference to Bishkek. So, well, it's a pleasure for me to have been invited to give a talk. We made an appointment in our last meeting, in our last presence meeting in Nur Sultan, to say when I come to Bishkek, I would visit KEU. At the moment, this is not possible. It's postponed, I would say, but now I'm at least virtually there. And this is, of course, a pleasure. So what I'm not doing here is I do not advertise the program, because this is the task of the university. And you mentioned already in the introduction, I would like to give a certain perspective on human relations management, perspective from social science, to say, and we will see in the folios which I present, what we are reading in, let's say, normal textbooks on human relation management. It's fine, but it's a very particular perspective. And when we try to bring it down to Kyrgyzstan, maybe we have to adapt something. Yeah, so this is my starting point, and now I bring my folios in. Okay, so this is me and my university, and I will switch to the next folio, which means all those talent partners, the partners who set up that study program. And here we have 6 universities from Central Asia, 2 from Kyrgyzstan, and 4 partners from Europe who form a kind of advisory group. And when I look at the partners, I can already say, well, the sociologists are quite strong. So the colleagues from Brussels are sociologists, we from Magdeburg are sociologists, and one of the colleagues from Bulgaria is also a sociologist. And so far, Well, of course, we had a discussion on the relevance of different disciplines in this study program. What am I going to talk? I want to discuss the interdisciplinary field of human relations management. I will then give some notes to textbooks of HRM and how far these textbooks are relevant or have to be adapted when we look to the particularities of Central Asia. And then I will provide some examples from my own researches, which I did, to say, here I see many differences in what is really going on in the business world compared to what we find in these textbooks. So I start from the question, where do we place human relations management? And there is one thing where, let's say, sociologists are always very shocked and become, well, upset when we talk about Gary Becker. Probably you know him. So Becker took a certain position which we call, or which is called, economic imperialism. So Becker says, well, there are certain premises in economics, namely his REM hypothesis, saying man is rational, economizing and maximizing, and this is of course an adaptation of Adam Smith's view of Homo economicus, that every individual pursues his or her own goals for own benefits. Yeah, and while economists usually say, well, we adapt that to the field of economic action in the economy or so, Becker went further and said, well, we can apply this conception also to other fields which are not economic, but for example, social. So he discussed issues like marriage as an economic bargain and so on. And for sociologists, this goes a little bit too far, I would say, although, of course, when we think about former times, marriage relations, marriage contracts, and so on, this was a different situation, but love marriage, of course, would not anymore fit into, well, economic models. So we consider this position of economic imperialism to be asocial because it neglects the social constraints. And here I refer to a particular conception which we have both in economics as well as sociology, and this is a conception of bounded rationality. And I think we use it differently. When it is used in economics, it's usually the constraints of the market, the imperfect nature of markets, which are discussed here. And sociologists would say here bounded rationality concerns certain social codes of conduct, to say, well, this is why certain individuals or even firms do not act economically rational, yeah, because there are some constraints. So compared to that position, we have a different position which is found in sociology, and here I refer to Max Weber, the great sociologist, and of course he is well known also in other disciplines. And Max Weber said, he talked about the economy, where should we place the economy? And he brought the argument that the economy is always a certain part of society. Yeah, and one could say, in the perspective of, let's say, system theory in sociology, it is a subsystem of society, but only some part. And here we can place human relations management just into, well, the framework of the economy on one hand, but on a larger extent to society. Yes, here I bring another term of another social scientist, Karl Polanyi. He used the term the embeddedness of the economy in society. And then he said, of course, in the process of development of market society, the market society began more and more to dominate the entire, or the market began more and more to dominate the entire society. And Polanyi and some other scholars claim to re-embed the economy into society. Yeah, so this would be, let's say, a position from sociology. And now I come to the next folio, namely to say how we organized this study program, to say we have this big block, the big blue block, which is connected to economics, business administration, management. We have the field of psychology being involved. We have the field of law and, of course, of social science. So it is quite clear how economics is strongly related to human relations management. So psychology contributes with individual behavior at the workplace, for example, with behavior in hierarchies, with psychological processes in groups, minority issues, and. So a lot of issues which can be treated from the perspective of sociology or from the perspective of social science. Law, of course, is related to labor laws and standards in organization and so on. And social science, I would say, contributes with the relatedness to human relation management, to society, to its culture, to firms, and how firms are, let's say, shaped by the culture of society and so on. And we can also contribute to cross-cultural comparisons. So how I want to continue now is to talk about one particular module where I was involved in setting up this module, and this module is called organizational issues. And here we have two courses, namely organizational behavior and leadership, and work in organizations and society. And I don't directly talk about the module, but about some thoughts concerning the sociological perspective. Here I refer to different approaches in economics. On one hand, we have this normative approach, which came from the neoclassical sides, and here I refer to Ludwig von Mises, who said economics does not describe how the economy functions, but how it should function. And one can continue when we work with, I would say, best practice or so. Yeah, this is a normative approach to say we don't consider how the economy functions, but how it should function to make the best, let's say, profits or benefits or whatever. So there is a contrary position which is very close to economic sociology, and this is institutional economics. And here are some names, Webel and Mitchell and so on. And I refer to one particular name, namely Douglas North, who considers how institutions work. And of course, the first thing is, what are institutions and how are they influenced by culture? So I would say institutions are codes of conduct in everyday life, but also in the business world, which thicken and become formal or informal rules or norms. Then we have to have an understanding of what culture is, because culture and institutions, I would say, mutually influence each other. So when we look at these formal and informal rules, one can say formal rules can be easily investigated. We have, for example, laws and regulations, and they are written down. We have institutions which have formally been set up, but on the other hand, we have such informal rules, and they are difficult to analyze. I would say we have to analyze them with qualitative methods, to take interview with people. How do you run your business, for example, something like that, or by participant observation. Yeah, the question is, how do people behave? And I want to give you an example from my own researches. So I worked at the State University of St. Petersburg in the second half of the 1990s. So this was still the process of transformation of the system. And at that time, of course, we had a lot of formal banks. They were implemented, to say we need institutions of the market system, we have to set up banks and so on. But when I talked to the people and I asked them, do you use these banks? And they were laughing and said, no, we don't trust the banks. Yeah, if we trust the bank, we only go to Sberbank, but no private bank and so on. We keep the money under our bed. Yeah, and this would be formal institutions on one hand, to say we have banks, they have been set up, but on the other hand, informal institutions, normal people at least, perhaps not the large firms, did not use these banks. They didn't trust in these banks and therefore stored the money under the bed. So I bring this approach here because I think we have to also use it for the firm level, to say what is formal is one thing, what is getting on informal is another thing. And of course, this has to be also taught in HRM. Okay, now I come to the HRM textbooks. And of course, we had a look at these textbooks when we set up this study program. So most textbooks are textbooks of best practice, normative textbooks, to say you should behave in such a way, and so on. And they seem to be independent from culture, but if we really look at them, I would say they are based particularly on US business culture. And that's a different thing. We have to consider that not everything in business is equal to each other, but we have some distinctions. And here I refer to an approach which is called VOC, or varieties of capitalism approach. Yeah, it is an approach which says there is not one capitalism, but there are different forms of capitalism. For example, an Anglo-Saxon capitalism, which is very, very different from the continental European one in many different fields. So this is, I would say, the main finding of this approach, and my conclusion would be human relation management is culture dependent. So I have here some distinctions to say. On the one hand, we have the liberal market economies, which is the US, UK, Canada, and so on. And on the other hand, we have the coordinated market economies, which are more or less found in Central Europe, in Japan, and so on. And they really differ in different fields. For example, in industrial relations, so the European CMEs, for example, have a high level of membership in trade unions. We have collective bargaining with employees and so on. On the other hand, the more American type, or let's say liberal market economy types, is such where the workers and employees directly negotiate with one another. So that's only one point. We have some more points. Vocational training and education is very different in these two cultures. In the coordinated type, we have workers with very specific skills. They are trained by the firms and are very, very valuable for the firms. For example, now in the Corona crisis, we see in Germany that these people are not fired, but kept, perhaps put on a short-time labor or so, but they are kept because they are so valuable for the company. And this is opposite again to the United States, where people have more a very general training, which means they can be hired, they can be fired, and are useful for every firm. Yeah, another distinction would be the CMEs are more collaborative and the LMEs are more competitive. So I think it's not so important to get into these distinctions, but the question came up to say, when we have such a difference in US type, or let's say liberal type economies and coordinated type economies, are there perhaps other types of capitalism? And we in Magdeburg made us strong to say, yes, perhaps there is also a kind of post-socialist type of capitalism. And how can we perhaps consider such a post-socialist type? When I look at Central Asia now, I would say we have very specific features which we find. In Central Asia, we have certain aspects of post-socialist countries which are very typical for post-socialist countries. You see here what I mentioned: high educational levels, specific gender relations. We have certain attitudes towards state property versus private property. We very often find a certain paternalism in the people saying, well, the state is responsible for everything. On the other hand, in a market economy, we need self-responsibility. We talk about blood relations, which means service to certain people, to say, I give a present to somebody and expect something back, and so on. We have the appearance of autocratic versus democratic structures, and. Yeah. On the other hand, so don't let us disturb from my phone, I'm sorry. On the other hand, we have aspects of developing countries in Central Asia or of newly industrialized countries, namely, for example, very low incomes, very strong informal sector, a very large share of micro enterprises, and a large share of small and medium enterprises, and perhaps not so many big firms. We have a very, very high fluctuation in the labor market, and of course we have some specifics in Central Asia, which I mention here, certain retraditionalization of culture, yeah, to draw back to the nomadic heritage and so on, which means also retraditionalization of gender relations, for example. We can observe an invention of tradition. We can observe a language policy, and. So a long list, which I mentioned here, of course, it could be continue. But this is all very specific to Central Asia, I would say, and this also has to be taken in mind when we talk about human relations management. So I would say Central Asian societies bear elements of post-socialist countries, of developing countries, and of course also of market economies. It's a mix of it. I want to come now to some examples of human relations management topics which are, to my mind, related to culture. One topic which is also taken up in the study program is diversity management. And here you have a list of different factors of diversity management. So let's look at age first. So textbooks say, yeah, diversity management is very important, is necessary, and so on. And I think it is an outcome of the age pyramid which we find in Europe and the United States. And you see the left one is the age pyramid of the United States. The middle one is the age pyramid of Europe. And on the right hand, you have the age pyramid of Central Asia. So when we say we need, of course, diversity management concerning age, yeah, it's the pressure of population in Europe and the United States to invent such programs. And on the other hand, Central Asia has a lot of youth. Perhaps this issue of diversity management of age is not as important in Central Asia as in Europe, for example. When we talk about age, of course, there are other issues which become important when we, for example, consider labor employment. Yeah, we have different cohorts. We have a cohort of people who grew up in socialism, who still have certain attitudes from socialism. We have younger people who have never experienced real socialism, and so on. Yeah, of course, this is a very particular issue. How do I bring those people together with their attitudes and their, let's say, for example, yeah, trust in their own company, and so on. There are other very particular issues for Central Asia, which are different: retirement age, but also life planning. Yeah, for example, family planning, the number of children. So usually women get their children much earlier than, for example, in Europe. We have the specific function of families of old age insurances, yeah, where people rely on, yeah, where people say, well, we have to look after our old parents and so on. We have to support them. This is very, very particular situations for Central Asia. Look at gender diversity management. Yeah, of course, it is important, an important topic. We see that everywhere in the world, women earn less than their male counterparts. Women are the main bearers of the major burden of housework and children's education. And of course, this directly influences their position in the labor market. Yeah, so I supervise PhD thesis from Nur-Sultan University, and this woman is writing on the high percentage of women in the public sector and universities. And she should find out, why do we find so many women in this particular field of the economy? And of course, the answer is quite clear. Yeah, so universities, for example, are more adapted to the point that women have to bring their children to the kindergarten in the morning and can show up a little bit later or so, which is not perhaps possible in private businesses or so. Yeah, this means, of course, the special chores which a woman has compared to her husband are very often very traditional, and this means certain fields of the economy are closed for women. Yeah, then we have disability management. Of course, the question comes up, how are disabled people treated in the society as such, and do they have certain quotas, for example, in larger firms to say, well, when you employ a disabled, you will be supported by the state, and so on. And of course, the question of ethnicity then comes in, which has a particular shape in Kyrgyzstan, for example, and a regional aspect, north against south, and so on. You know all that I do not have to get into it. Now, another example, recruitment and wages or salaries and small and medium enterprises. So with colleagues, I did research in a number of post-socialist countries, namely, for example, in Russia and Central Asia, and I have also some knowledge on this particular region. And what we found out is that small and medium enterprises, particularly small enterprises, do not follow the best practice of HRM handbooks. For example, they don't select the best person whom they can find in the labor market, but they think in terms of the logic of their personal networks. Whom do they recruit? It is people with whom they shared biographies, such as they studied together or they made military service together and so on. Or it is a matter of blood. I did somebody a favor, and so the person comes back to me now and helps perhaps my son to be employed in this enterprise also. Or of course it's a matter of bribery, which means some certain diplomas could be, for example, bought in the market. So how then can a personal manager, for example, say, oh, I can rely this paper here, I can rely that diploma and employ this person also. This is all very, very specifics which we have to keep in our minds. The same when we look at the logic of family firms. Family firms usually have the logic to employ family members and relatives because they say this is people whom we can rely upon. We found out such issues in personal interviews which we had with family firms. Russia was specific that they said, no, we don't want to employ family members. They are too close, and when they are too close, we have to look after them. We are obliged to share, for example, profits and instead they relied on these shared biographies, which I already mentioned. Then, of course, everybody knows, but it is not in these HRM textbooks when we talk about wages, income, salaries also. And when you would pose a quantitative question, what is your income? And this is what statisticians do. When you look at the official statistics, what is your income or so? But everybody knows we have different kinds of incomes. We have an official part, we have an unofficial part or so. And of course, when we pose questions concerning incomes, and I know that I would distinguish this and say, what is your official salary? What extras do you get? And so on to calculate on my own. And of course, this is all a matter of, well, let's say negotiations between firms and employees, which is very specific. I see I have to come to an end. I come to the logic as SMEs. The logic of SMEs is very different to the logic of large enterprises. And when I say what we can read in the textbooks of human relation management, then it is perhaps closer to large enterprises, but not very close to medium and small enterprises. I would say HRM textbooks have a bias on size. And then of course we have to ask ourselves, which role do large enterprises play in your economy concerning their number, compared to SMEs, for example, concerning the number of employees, of course, concerning the turnover, all that comes in. But HRM, the question is HRM only made for large enterprises or also for smaller firms? So we investigated the logic of small and medium enterprises, and in Russia and in Central Europe we found, for example, the logic of informality, to say we want to be non-visible. Non-visible, first of all, to avoid taxes, non-visible also to say we don't want to be charged by the mafia or any other racketeers, to say we have to pay protection money. Interesting was also the self-understanding of entrepreneurs, insofar that nobody of these entrepreneurs considered himself to be entrepreneurs. They said, well, we are craftsmen or something like that. But when we think to Joseph Schumpeter, for example, he says an entrepreneur has a very specific psychology or specific mentality, to say an entrepreneur feels I am born for business or something like that. Yeah, this is typically not found in such small and medium enterprises. Yes, now I come to the end, and the questions which show up from my presentation should be, is HRM only an issue of big firms or also of small and medium firms? And the other question, of course, which is important for the teachers, how do students of economics cope with the divergence of HRM theory and practice in Central Asia? And here some literature. The left two are from myself and colleagues, and the right ones I mentioned. This is Varieties of Capitalism and Douglas North. Thank you very much for your attention.
Many thanks for your presentation. It was very interesting. Do we have any questions from our participants? You can either put it on chat box or just, I don't know, say it out loud. I think from my point of view, I have one question. It's like, you have mentioned that due to cultural, I don't know, cultural rights in Central Asia, all this kind of paternalism existing, and that we are not using these best practices. How do you think, does it hinder the growth for our economies in the region? Because I mean, majority, we are not the developed countries, so.
Whether it hinders or not, it's difficult to say. Yeah, first of all, we have to recognize it, I would say. Yeah. You see, when we always measure ourselves according to these best practice textbooks, yeah, then of course it is a hindrance. But on the other hand, when you know about that, how it works, of course, then it is just a difference. Yeah, and I say, let's be clear about that difference, to say, well, this is what the textbooks are doing, but the situation in, for example, small and medium firms in Central Asia is different. And insofar, we have to teach about that difference too. Yeah, because otherwise it is to some degree useless. Yeah. This is my opinion. So I'm very careful to say we measure ourselves always according to this best practice. Is it an answer? Sorry.
Yes, it's answer. It's a very good answer. I'm just like, you have mentioned that all these United States, like we have a lot of books from there, so it is just focusing on these countries. So yeah, applicability of that practice as theory into our peculiarities.
Yeah, perhaps I say that. You see, concerning our module, what we developed, of course, my colleague Eckert and I, we had a look at the US textbooks, we had a look at the European textbooks, and already saw this large difference between these two types of textbooks, yeah, because they always refer to a different culture, yeah, and therefore I would say buy textbooks not only from the United States but perhaps also from Europe or from Japan or whatever, to say, well, and here we can see the differences, yeah, and then the next step would be, and now we try to really find out the difference in Central Asia at the moment. The question is always, is it only a matter of time until Central Asia has adapted to the US or to Europe? I don't know. Or, and this is our argument, do they develop a certain specific type of capitalism, yeah, in the largest sense, but which of course works on the firm levels and so on, which is to some degree different, so that you sooner or later have to develop your own textbooks. Yeah, this would be my conclusion.
Heiko, thank you very much for presentation. I haven't the question, but I would like to say, you know, our situation in our economy maybe better than me, than our colleagues, and I think it's very a big research, huge research from you. Yeah, it was very interesting for us. Thank you very much. Maybe our colleagues have question. Colleagues?
Yeah, we have from chat one question is coming from Dinaraja. She's asking, she's confused with the economic category used to work, but as a types of economies, right? What is coordinated economies mean? Like, for example, Sweden, and how the best practice of coordinated economies can be applied in the Kyrgyz Republic in the context of HRM.
Yes, so of course I didn't talk so much about that issue. It should just show the difference, yeah, in, let's say, how the economy works, the difference in let's say in continental Europe on one hand, and in the US and the UK on the other hand. Yeah. So my idea was, when you only look at the one side of these textbooks coming from the US context or UK context, of course, you always get this image of these liberal type economies and their specifics, yeah, concerning, for example, the hiring of laborers, concerning financial issues like short-term capital generation via the stock market and so on. And you see what these authors whom I mentioned observed was really a different perspective of firm owners and so on, to say, how do I invest my capital, how do I generate my capital, how do I seek employees, do I keep them in crisis, and so on. Yeah. So of course Sweden belongs to that model, to that model of let's say European type or coordinated economies. Yeah. So the question is, how you follow now, should we adopt something? So my argument is not directly adopt something, first to find out, where are you? Where is your economy? Yeah, and this can only be done by empirical research. So Saikal and I, we discussed on experimental economics, for example. Yeah, this would be a small field in economics where I say they are on the, from my point of view, on the right track. Yeah, to say we really have to investigate what is going on. Yeah, and then decide whether we are perhaps closer to the US type model or to the European type model, or perhaps we are totally different. Both does not fit. Yeah, and so far my recommendation is, don't so easily adopt something, but first analyze and then think about adaptation.
Thank you. I think it was very precise and good answer. And I think that as you are mentioning this experimental economics, that I think within this project we have an opportunity, maybe in the future we can conduct such kind of experiment, some researches and understanding, right, of our own economies and culturally, and the relations in human resource management.
Can I contribute?
Yes, sure.
So thank you, Heiko. I like very much your overview. What strikes me is that this is a good opportunity to have a better discussion between the partners also in Europe, because as you very well know, from our side, from Vrije Universiteit Brussel, we have our specialist in human resource management, Roland Pepermans, who also contributed very strongly in the work group of human resource management practice. And well, the participants of Central Asia, when they were in Brussels in February, they had also very intense discussions with him. And well, one example that I remember very well was on recruitment and best practices in human resource management. And now, basically, completely opposite to what you're saying, but you know, Roland Pepermans' point of view is, well, human resource management, that's universal. It has universal rules, universal theory, and you only have to look how you can specify things for one specific region. And now we had this discussion on recruitment, and obviously one of the elements in the discussion was what, like, well, Kyrgyzstan, for example, we face corruption, we face favoritism, we face nepotism. These are part of general practices. Let's put it like that. And is this, to what extent is this now compatible with the human resource management practices? And one remarkable answer that Pepermans was giving was like, well, it's the basic thing is that you have to have explicit rules in your recruitment practice, and you can specify these rules in a different way. For example, if personal networks are this important, then I would say make explicit in your recruitment practice that having a personal network is very important. Like this. So his basic rule, which I also liked, was like, it doesn't matter in the recruitment practice how you operate, but be very strict in having rules that are clear for everybody, which might also include like being explicit in your recruitment practice about like having a personal network, but don't change the rules when you're actually committing this recruitment. So this was an opposite position, but it was not incompatible, let's say, with what Heiko was explaining now. I don't know for sure, but it's an interesting discussion. So maybe we can go a little bit further in that kind of discussion. Thank you.
Okay, I just comment on it. Jan, thank you very much. My answer is, let's say, similar to the answer to Saikal. The major problem is always that we have something like a best practice or so. Yeah, this normative approach. Yeah, of course, I know studies, and they are not only from sociologists, also from economists, who say bounded rationality, or let's say the muddling through everyday life, can be the best solution to a problem. Yeah, but when you always think I have to follow that best practice also, yeah, and you cannot do that because of, I don't know, corruption or that and that, or nepotism or whatever, yeah, then you always feel to be second class compared to these guidelines also. Yeah, and I think, yeah, this is really a matter which should be discussed. Yeah, I think, well, institutions that are existent perhaps are not, every institution is perhaps not really efficient or so. Yeah, but on the other hand, they exist. Yeah, and as long as they exist, they are important. Yeah. New institutional economists think institutions exist only so long as they are efficient, and otherwise they are dropped, and this is wrong. Yeah, so new institutional economists, institutionalists are two different things. Institutionalists think there are institutions because these institutions are an outcome of culture in the farthest sense. Yeah, to say it's an expression of culture, it is adapted in an adaptation of rules to certain conditions. Yeah, and they live. I don't think we should keep them forever or so, but it's a very long and slow process. Yeah, and well, this is my attitude. I don't say this is a real attitude or so. This would be normative. I say this should be kept in mind and discussed. Yeah, with regard to how do you teach, how could a textbook for Central Asia look like also. Yeah.
Thank you. I see that Elira Turdubayeva, she has questions.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we do. Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor. It's a great opportunity for Kyrgyzstan universities to start launching such programs and preparing personnel who can work on this sphere, because our country needs such professionals in HRM. So how you are going to adapt Western curriculum to local context, because our local cultural context of organizational culture and all human relations, informal relations, all are so different from West. And how are you going to teach students how to manage, how to do research, how to develop strategies that will work in Central Asian context, which is culturally different from West? And which resources are you going to use? Because we have a lack of scholarship in this topic in Central Asia on HRM, and also on organizational culture and on organizational behavior also, or organizational communication. And the second question is about the relationships at work, at workplace, where the basic human rights are violated, even at academic institutions like UCA, where you are going to launch such program. Many faculties' rights are being violated through firing a lot of them during coronavirus epidemic. So how they are going to prepare students who will manage HRM while they are themselves violating their faculties' academicians' rights? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. Well, it's difficult to answer. On one hand, of course, we try in this curriculum, which we together developed and where we advised to bring into that one module, culture of organization, organizational, we brought the issue of culture in to say, well, this would be one of the modules where the issue of culture should be considered. Yeah. So how do I teach on my own? Basically, when I teach, while I'm teaching on, for example, Central Asia, I'm teaching on Russia, I'm teaching on India. So perhaps I always start, this is the situation in Germany, and now we look at the situation in, for example, Kyrgyzstan. Yeah, is it the same? What is different? Yeah, to raise, first of all, cultural awareness, to raise also a critical review of books, to say, oh, they are writing about America, but this is not Central Asia, something like that. Yeah. We need that awareness first. The second thing, of course, how I used to teach, but this depends on the program where you teach, is I train students in research work. I, for example, travel with students to Central Asia. Hopefully next spring, we are planning to take research on domestic violence in Central Asia, so it's not connected to your topic, but nevertheless, this is how I used to teach. And of course, basically, yeah, if you have the resources, of course, if you have the time, this could be done also in such a program to say, now we want to investigate, for example, violations of labor laws or so. Yeah, we take interviews in firms, we take interviews with employees, and this can be done. Yeah. And I think it's very, very useful, because then students can learn really, this is a norm and this is a practice. Yeah, and we are not yet close together for whatever reasons or so. Yeah, this can be done if you can, let's say, adapt the models, yeah, to such practices, internships, whatever, yeah, everything which would fit into such a direction to say, one thing is teaching in our glass house in the university, the other thing is going into the firm, yeah, and really look and talk to people and scientifically investigate how it works.
Thank you, Heiko, for your answers. I think we can have like one last question. What is the new impact of sociology survey analytical findings to modify the HRM standards?
Oh, I haven't got it because I was at the same time I was reading here.
The second question, I think, like you can. What is the new impact of sociology to modify HRM standards?
So what I try to show is that economic sociology, at least how I teach it, is working in the field to investigate how the economy runs. Yeah. Which means we do researches how the economy runs, be it in Germany or be it in Central Asia, yeah, to say we really talk to the people and, for example, try to find out what is the self-understanding of people who run a small firm. Yeah, and when we find out, for example, in such a research, oh, these people have no interest to expand. Yeah, they just want to have an income for their family. Yeah, they don't feel like entrepreneurs. They were pushed into the market because they didn't find employment. Yeah, that's a totally different situation as if you say, well, I am born to run an enterprise, I want to make money, I want to get success or so. Yeah, and this is, well, to contrast, to say this is how it should be, the normative thing, and then really ask the people about their biographies, yeah, and how they take decisions nowadays, yeah. for example, the choice between, I don't know, yeah, ask the people, why don't you employ this woman? Yeah, and listen to the answers. Yeah, and when you know the answers, perhaps then you know what has to be changed in the labor laws or so. Yeah, should be certain quotas set, for example. Yeah, there are many countries working with quotas. Yeah, to say in higher positions we need women's quotas or quotas for disabled people also. Yeah, but first, before we set these quotas again, we have to find out what is going on. Yeah, this is my way how I think I can contribute as an economic sociologist. Yeah, I think well, I think it's a certain division of labor which developed at the beginning. Of course, the two disciplines, economic sociology, at the times of Max Weber, they were not as separated as it is now. Yeah, so now what, so I'm a self-studied economics, what we as non-economists have usually in mind is neoclassical economics. But of course there are many other different fields where I would say, yes, of course, there are certain fields, they do perhaps similar things like we are doing. Yeah. And therefore, perhaps you don't need economic sociologists to adapt the program. Yeah, there are maybe people from your own discipline, but perhaps they are not heard. I don't know.
Many thanks. I think Elira, I think I can provide you later on by email feedback regarding the project and how it is built. I will send you an email. So I hope that you all have enjoyed the presentation and the topic, the discussion. I think it was very interesting and useful. Thank you very much for active participation, for good questions, for good discussions, and yeah. I mean, it's always interesting, right, to talk and have something to learn about for future. And I hope that there will be more opportunities for us to collaborate in sociology, maybe some research works. And many thanks to Jan, who has joined and contributed to our discussions, to our students. I will be posting it on Facebook so everybody can watch it, rewatch it again. I hope that successfully we will launch our program, and soon we will meet all of you in Bishkek, our team project members. Thank you.
So we wish you success.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
All of yeah, bye. Hope we see you
Very soon.
again. Yeah. In
Take
the
care.
next
Yes.
webinars, our webinars. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you very much. Bye.